When President Obama took office, most progressives believed that he was going to get tough on Wall Street crime. But with only 1 year left to go in his presidency, we've yet to see a single Wall Streeter go to prison for destroying our economy through illegal activity. And that's why this has become a major campaign issue for Democrats in this year's election, because these same criminals are still out there breaking the law and ripping off consumers. Ring of Fire Radio's Sam Seder recently spoke with securities attorney Peter Mougey about some of the worst Wall Street crimes taking place, so let's take a look.
So, Peter, of course, we're a couple months out from the anniversary of when Bernie Madoff went to prison, and of course there was a recent movie about Bernie Madoff. Let's just start. Remind people what a Ponzi scheme is.
Ponzi scheme's actually named after the first person to come up with this kind of scheme or this plan, and simplistically, it's that the perpetrator is convincing investors, and I say that in quotes, to give him or her their money to invest, and he promises all of these consistent and steady returns. And so the investor gives their money to the perpetrator, and the first one, a guy by the name of Ponzi, and then as they ask for money back, they get paid with other people's investments. So there is no returns. The money is essentially stolen, and that there's phony statements or phony reports issued to show you fictitious returns, and that when you take income out or withdrawals out, that you're actually being paid with your own money or with someone else's money. And the goal or the thought of the perpetrator is that you go and tell, I'm getting 9.5% returns and have been for 5 years from, this financial advisor, and that other people go give their money. So it's this scheme that you keep stealing money of one person after another and use those continued investments to pay back the initial investors with either income withdrawals, what they think is income, but is actually either other people's money or their own. And then you send these folks fraudulent statements indicating, sizable, good, steady returns over time. And some of these go on for decades, like Madoff's did. They're very common, more common than you think. They happen in places with a lot of retirees that are looking for income, and they're regular and routine. And the problem is they're awfully difficult to collect on. It can actually just ruin people's lives because they've put life savings in with these folks.
Now, I understand why people end up putting their money into these Ponzi schemes is because it's greed.
Right.
We all want to believe on some level that there is a secret way of making money. And because I have access to this guy or to that lady, and I can put my money in there, I have the access to make this easy money. But from the Ponzi scheme perpetrator, what's going through their heads? That like at one point they're going to just disappear, or do they think they can? Did Bernie Madoff think that he could do this until he died? I mean, because it seems to me that there's no. Once you go down this road, I mean, a buddy of mine wrote a book on Sam Israel, who didn't mean to have a Ponzi scheme, but when he was failing, that's what he had to do. And he just basically went crazy because it was driving him crazy.
Yeah.
That was not his intention. Seems like Madoff went into this with the intention of, this is how I'm going to make a tremendous amount of money. How did he think it would end?
I think there's two different camps. One, you have the legitimate advisor that pitches a bunch of clients, gathers their money, and makes a couple losing trades, doubles down, brings in new investors, tries to cover it up, and then he goes over the cliff and to a point of no return. I think that's the majority of these, or I'd like to think they are, the Ponzi scheme guys. The other hand, you have the Madoffs of the world that I don't know what he was thinking when he started, but after a while it becomes just abundantly clear that there's no way to catch up, and that no matter what trades you make, you're never going to be able to catch up. But you touch on a really interesting subject, in that how in the world, with all of this money that Madoff had, that he stole and was enjoying other people's money, how could you enjoy it? How can you go to sleep at night? I mean, how do you? It would take me over to knowing that sooner or later you were going to get caught. It wasn't a matter of when, it's if. I'm sorry, I said it backwards. It's not a matter of if, it's when you're going to get caught. I can't imagine enjoying and living life like that, and I don't see how anybody can. I think you die of a heart attack before it would start. But I don't think most of them begin like that. I think most of them are a few bad trades, and then the traders cover them up and then use other people's money to cover up the mistake, and then it just gets to the point where it just extrapolates and they can't get out. I'd like to think that's where a lot of those start, but
and I guess to a certain extent, they just hope when those people they get behind, they just hope that some crazy thing happens, that all of a sudden like they win the lottery or something to that effect, I guess. And now my understanding is too that Harry Markopolos, he is the man who's gave a warning to, well, I think to SEC folks, that Madoff was doing something that did not make sense.
Right.
He claims there's like 2 or 3 other Ponzi schemes out there that he's identified that he's going to tell the government about. Do you think they're going to listen this time? I mean,
I think
has
they've
there
gotten
been a change
Oh, my Lord.
at the SEC? Because we have 2 forms, it seems to me, of fraud. There's this type of fraud where I think even the perpetrators would realize and say, I'm committing fraud. And then there's securities fraud. In other words, you're selling garbage that you know is garbage and you're offloading it. And I think those people just see themselves as businessmen on some level. But tell me, like, has the SEC, at the very least for the fraudsters who consider themselves fraudsters, I think, is the SEC doing better on that accord or no?
They would like you to think that they are. I can't see that they are. And I think the biggest problem is one of funding. I think the second biggest issue is that the types of people they have working at the SEC and that revolving door coming in and out, that you just don't have the institutional knowledge. So your first point, have they learned their lesson? Well, the lesson from 5 years ago it has to escape the folks that just came in the door. They haven't. There's been no institutional knowledge. There's this constant turnover. The folks at the SEC are filling short stints and short gigs and going from one job to using the SEC as a catalyst to get into the next bigger, higher paying private position. So have we fixed the problem? I think the answer is unequivocally no. We haven't funded the SEC. They don't have the proper resources. We still have the revolving door problem. So do I think it's a fraud at the SEC like some of the pundits are saying? No. Do I think it's a political problem that you're seeing now with the Hillary and the Bernie Sanders debate here a week or 2 ago with the funding issues, with Wall Street, just pouring money into politics? I think all of these are interconnected. Do I think it's an intentional decision on behalf of the SEC to let this stuff slip through the cracks? No, but I think they're so understaffed, so undermanned, so underfunded, the people coming in and out. I think this stuff just slips through the cracks left and right. And, I think the solution is really to get the political money out of the Wall Street money out of politics and to let these folks operate like regulators. A lot of the state regulators are very successful investigating these offices. The state of Alabama, Joe Borg and his office, state of Utah, kind of the folks up in the Northeast, they do a great job of prosecuting a lot of these financial frauds but I don't think they have a lot of that political muscle, influencing decisions and staffing issues. So let's get the money, the political money, the lobby money out of the regulatory scheme and the oversight. I think you'd see some of this stuff getting cleaned up.
Peter, we've talked about this in the past. I wanted to get an update. Tell us what the situation, just go back for people who aren't aware of why Puerto Rico is in such dire financial straits. Give folks a little primer.
Puerto Rico, over the last 3, 4, 5 decades, has borrowed money to pay current bills. So at this point, there's $72 billion in debt in Puerto Rico, 300 or 400, 500% worse per capita than any other state. Their pension system is abysmally funded, and I'm not saying abysmally funded by like Illinois standards. They are 200 or 300% worse funded than the worst state in the U.S. Now, keep in mind that Puerto Rico, as a lot of people forget, Commonwealth of the United States, does not have voting rights in D.C., but at the same time, their folks can travel to the United States freely and are United States citizens. So you have this kind of influx leaving the island, coming to the U.S., especially with younger people. It is a perfect storm. It's been brewing for decades. Now, put on top of that you have investment banks like UBS, the great, huge Swiss bank. You have Santander out of Spain, that their business models have been, let's underwrite and push as much of this debt writing machine as humanly possible out of Puerto Rico, making tens and tens and hundreds of millions of dollars underwriting the debt. And underwriting means that they take the debt public, they hold the hand of the issuers, the Puerto Rican government or their quasi-governmental agencies, issue the debt, take it in, and then sell it. And whether they sell it to their own customers or whether they sell it on the mainland, either way, their goal is simply to underwrite, make the fees, and push it out the front door so they don't bear the risk. And so their goal is to underwrite as much as humanly possible and then line their own pockets with the folks that were working there on the island. The island's controlled by essentially two or three banks, UBS, Santander, Banco Popular, and they were underwriting billions of dollars of debt every year. I kind of liken it to anybody's got a kid in college or a younger kid that they get a little behind on their bills, and then they borrow some money on a credit card that they're passing out at on the college campuses, and then you pay. Then you get further behind and further behind and further behind because the interest is the exact same thing that's going on in Puerto Rico, just with a lot more zeros on the end.
So when you say they're underwriting the debt, they're basically just sort of issuing another, like almost a consolidating loan.
It's exactly right. So they're taking the loan. That's a good way to put it. They're taking the new debt, paying off old debt, but it's always more than what they borrowed before. So the problem just exacerbates, just gets bigger and bigger, and you can see the line. I mean, the line is straight up, the amount of debt incurred by the Puerto Rican citizens. But what's just absolutely disgusting about the business models, let's take UBS, for instance, and Santander's not far behind. But UBS would underwrite the debt, and then they would put it in their own closed-end funds, which are a lot like mutual funds, that is managed by a UBS affiliate. And then who do they sell it to? Their own clients. So their own clients now are concentrated in these Puerto Rican securities, Puerto Rican debt, and they got to the point where more than 50% of their client base is concentrated in Puerto Rican paper. So when the Puerto Rican economy gets to the point where it's just there's huge problems, and they have to tell their own clients, look, you got to start diversifying, you got to start getting out. Their own clients can't. Why? There's no one to sell this crap to because everybody's concentrated in it. They can't tell their own people to sell, their own clients to sell. So they underwrite it, they put it in their mutual funds, they charge the closed-end funds, then they charge them a fee inside the funds, then they sell them to their clients, then they charge them a load or a commission. It's farm to table, essentially making fees every step of the way, and they just kept pouring it on or putting it on the backs of their own clients, Puerto Ricans. Now it's a mess.
Peter, let me ask you two questions. One, when the banks underwrote these loans, in other words, this debt rather, when they basically issued these consolidating loans that they ended up then using as a security, did they know that there was no way that these loans were going to get repaid? A, and then B, when they sell it back to their clients, what they're essentially doing is not only are they making fees on both ends, but they're also mitigating their own risk, right?
It's not mitigating. They are taking their risk and taking it to zero and pushing
and
it off on Main Street.
And giving it to their clients.
Yeah, absolutely. So
then telling their clients that the risk is not as high as they should know it is.
And Sam, it's the same business model that we were talking about the SEC earlier and have they learned their lesson. That business model is the exact same thing we had in the '08 crisis with subprime mortgages in the banks. Underwrite the loans, get them off the books. We don't care if it's crap. Why? Because we're going to sell it down the road to some CDO or some securitized product. It's not going to be on our books. All we want to do is make the fee off the transaction and shove it onto Main Street's back. This is the exact same business model a few years later, and it's underwrite, fee, generation, take a point here, 50 basis points here, and then shove the risk onto Main Street. It's the same business model. You would think somebody in the regulatory side would wake up and say, this isn't appropriate. We're sick and tired of Main Street shouldering these burdens, shouldering the load, shouldering the risk. The story was Santander, which is one of the biggest banks in the world out of Spain, and they actually, you're talking about mitigating risks, they actually knew about the heightened risks of the Puerto Rican securities, had an action plan that they took their own risk, their proprietary, their house risk to the bank, sold their securities almost down to zero, the Puerto Rican securities, but they never heightened the risk on their own internal rating system for their financial advisors and their clients, because they knew the market's illiquid. So if the clients sold their securities,
they're dumping their stuff, they don't want their clients to dump it, because then they won't be able to sell their stuff.
It's disgusting.
All right, Peter, we got 30 seconds left here. Let me ask you this. Did they think, well, I guess, in that case of Santander, they just figured, we're just going to dump this toxic stuff before anybody else does.
That's right.
Even our own clients. We're selling it to our own clients in some level.
They did sell it to their own clients in some cases.
Was there a general thought, too, that this would there'd be another bailout by the American government, or did they just not even get that far and they just figured the bailout will come in the form of our own customers? We just got about 20 seconds.
I think the bailout's going to come in the form of our own customers. We're going to get this stuff off of our back. We're going to push it onto our own customers. And right now, the problem's so big, they don't have bankruptcy protection in Puerto Rico. So there is we can just roll into bankruptcy and get some protection from our federal laws. There is no bankruptcy protection. This is going to get worse before it's going to get better. And it is going to be a complete disaster for an island with 3.6 million people that are American citizens. It's an absolute mess.
Peter Mougey, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.